Hey gang, it's Platt here, and today we're continuing on our wine series. We're still staying way down south, but we're moving from Australia to New Zealand. New Zealand produces roughly 285 million liters of wine per year, and that production is from 91,000 acres under vine. 90% of that wine produced gets exported. The major customers are the United States, Britain, and its neighbor Australia. New Zealand, just check our notes. New Zealanders consume roughly 20 liters of wine per year, and about a third of that is imported. They like imported wine a little more than their neighbors Australia. New Zealand wine industry has been growing fairly rapidly for the last generation or so, roughly 17% a year for the last 20 years. When we get into the history of New Zealand wine, you can kind of see why there's been a rapid growth of late. New Zealand's wine industry is fairly similar to its neighbor Australia. In fact, so much so that they actually share basically the same founder. In 1836, James Busby, which we learned in the Australian video, was the father of their wine industry. Well, he came to New Zealand in 1836 and produced some of the first wines for British soldiers there. A few years later, in 1851, French missionaries, Catholic missionaries, came down and helped establish the oldest winery down there, Mission Estates Wines. That's the oldest continuously running winery down there. And again, they brought their culture and their grapes to there. A few years later, like the rest of the world, roughly in the mid-1880s, New Zealand also had to confront the phylloxera epidemic, roughly around 1885. Now, what New Zealand did was different than the rest of the world, and I have to kind of go back on the phylloxera epidemic. What phylloxera is a little bug, mite, whatever, that attacks the roots of grapevines. Now, what they found was that American rootstocks, which was from the scientific name is Vitis lambrusco, were resistant to this little bug, where the classic wine grapes, Vitis vinifera, were not. Well, what most growers in Europe and South Africa, Australia did when they faced with it was they just ripped out the roots, grafted on the American rootstocks onto the vines of your Cabernet, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc wines, and that's how they fought that. In New Zealand, they just ripped out everything and just planted Vitis lambrusco. Well, the only problem is Vitis lambrusco does not produce the same quality of wine as Vitis vinifera. So that kind of really hurt the Australian wine industry as far as quality products that they could get exported. New Zealand also ran into something that nearly every other country in the world except the U.S. didn't have to worry about, and that was a temperance movement. Just like in the U.S., starting around the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a push to prohibit alcohol sales or just stop the production and sales of alcohol. New Zealand didn't go total prohibition like they did in the United States, but there were certain sections in New Zealand where there was no alcohol at sales, and they had real strict laws, including closing bars at 6 o'clock. This created something called the 6 o'clock swill, where factory workers would get out of work at 4 or 5, head straight to the bar and just pound as many as they could before last call. Kind of like they do in some places here. But last call was 6 o'clock, and that actually lasted for a long time, from 1917 to 1967. And it was that very prohibitive regulation that also killed the New Zealand wine industry. Well, finally around the 1970s, things lightened up, and that helped bring back investment and interest in the New Zealand wine industry and bring growth. And that growth was on the back of one grape, Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc makes up roughly 59% of the total acreage planted for wine production in New Zealand. New Zealand's home to roughly 30 different white wine varieties, obviously Sauvignon Blanc the most popular, and 23 plus red wine varietals, where Pinot Noir is the #1 red wine varietals. 79% of total wine production in New Zealand is white wine. They're a white wine country, unlike Australia, which is closer to 50-50. New Zealand loves their white wine. New Zealand, the country itself and the wine industry, is kind of split between the North Island and the South Island. The North Island, warmer climate, closer to the equator, It's home to 6 of the 10 major wine growing regions, including Auckland and Hawke's Bay. The southern island, which I think probably most people in the U.S. might be more familiar with, is the larger island of the two, further south, home to some of the furthest south vineyards on the entire planet. It's cut in half by what is referred to as the Southern Alps, and most of the vineyards are on the eastern side of those mountains, and it creates a rain shadow and a dry, cool climate. And it's probably home to a bulk of the production. I think roughly 60% of the production is South Island, 40% of the production the North Island. New Zealand is similar to its neighbor Australia in another way. They follow the 85% rule, and we went over this in the Australian video. If the bottle says it's a certain varietal, it's at least 85% of that varietal. If it says it's a certain vintage year, it's at least 85% of that vintage year. And if it says it's from a certain region, it's at least 85% of that certain region. Today, we are going to try the Cupcake Vineyards 2016 Sauvignon Blanc. The reason I picked Cupcake, similar to why I picked Yellowtail last time, are these the finest representations from these countries? No. But I think, again, these are the wines, and I think Cupcake's one. I think the average person is probably, that's going to be the first wine they're having from those countries, or the introduction. Also, too, I think that the price point is a decent value. And at the end of the day, that's all you really want from a wine. I mean, you could obviously spend a lot if you want a Lafite, Rothschild, or whatever, and you have that money, fine. But just trying to find a solid value, I think, is a little more important. And everything I read, and several ladies at work have told me they really like this wine, so we're going to give this a try. It is from the Marlborough region, which is probably the predominant region of the Southern Island and home to a massive Sauvignon Blanc production. Cupcake, just a little business insider on wine. Cupcake is part of the wine group portfolio. The way wine companies grow is a little different than beer companies. Budweiser 100 years ago was just Budweiser. But when they wanted to grow, they added Bud Light, Bud Ice, all the different varieties, flavors, stouts, this, that, and the other. Where wine companies, a lot of times they'll just pick up other vineyards, but leave that vineyard name. If it's got a family history, they'll leave that and they'll just pick up a bunch of different vineyards in their line of products. And that's what the wine group does. They have Cupcake, but they also have Franzia, Benzinger. I think they have the Mogan David line. So they just pick up other lines to grow. So let's give this a try. Crisp. I don't want to use the old cat pee Sauvignon Blanc thing, but a little fruit, a little slight acid on the side, not much, a little bite. Maybe just an hint of light apple. As far as body, or as far as viscosity, it's light, very drinkable. Overall, it's all right. I think a lot of people would like the sweetness. There's enough sweetness where if you're looking for a simpler, sweeter thing, this still kind of works. It's not over the top sweet. It doesn't punch the tongue too much, but there's enough sweetness there, enough little crispness there. Again, it's all right. I think I paid $5.99 for this. So, for again, value-wise, it's a nice glass of wine. I would probably drink it on a warmer day than a cool. We're getting into fall. That might be more Chardonnay type stuff. This is fine for a late summer, Indian summer kind of day. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like below. That lets YouTube know that people like my content. Hopefully, in the search features, pushes up the videos. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.